Have you ever seen something you weren't meant to see? I don't mean just things like ghosts or shadows in the dark. I mean something that shouldn't exist, something so wrong that even looking at it feels like a sin. I used to think I understood evil. I'm a priest after all. I've seen men at their lowest, done my best to help them. I thought I knew what darkness was. Sadly, I was wrong. It was spring, but Wyoming hadn't gotten the memo. The snow was coming down thick, the kind of heavy silent fall that buries the world in stillness. I had taken a few days off to stay at a remote cabin. Just me, the mountains, and time to think. A chance to step away from everything. The cabin belonged to an old friend of the church, a retired pastor who swore the place was perfect for solitude. Just don't stay out past dark, he told me with a chuckle. Things get strange, he said. I assumed he meant wolves or coyotes. I was wrong about that too. The first day was peaceful, the kind of peace that presses on you. I spent the morning hiking, following a narrow trail that wound through the pines, heavy with snow. The air was so still that every step sounded too loud, every breath felt like an intrusion. I should have paid more attention to that feeling. By noon, I had wandered deeper than I intended. I was about to turn back when I noticed something that seemed off. The trees ahead of me were strange, like someone tried to make the trees but couldn't quite do it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, branches bending under the weight of snow, forming strange shapes. Then I saw a figure sitting behind a tree. It was not moving, just watching me. I don't know how long I stood there. My brain kept telling me it's just a person, but my body knew better. The thing was too thin. Even while sitting, its limbs looked stretched, its arms wrapped around the trunk like a spider gripping its web. And also its eyes. They weren't human, at least they didn't seem to be. They were too big, too dark, too empty. The longer I looked, the worse it got. My stomach turned, my head buzzed like the thing's very existence was wrong. And then it moved, but not like a person, not even like an animal. It shifted without effort, without sound, its head tilting in a way that sent ice down my spine. I stepped back, my boot crunched in the snow, and in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I ran, didn't think, just ran. By the time I got back to the cabin, I was shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. I rushed in and bolted the door behind me, pressing my back against the wood, trying to catch my breath. And that's when I remembered the stories. I had heard about it during our Fight the Demonic sermons. A Wendigo, the name alone made my skin crawl. A creature born from hunger, something that used to be human until it ate the flesh of another and became something else, something that never stops being hungry. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting the stories get to me, but I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I decided to leave, but there was a problem. The snow had blocked the road. There was no way to drive out. I had two choices, wait it out or hike to the nearest town. I chose wrong. I packed my bag, brought a hunting knife and an old rifle that had been left in the cabin. I wasn't a fighter, I was not proficient with a rifle, but I wasn't going into the woods unarmed. The town was 5 miles away, not an easy hike, but doable. At least that's what I thought. I said a prayer and departed. The first hour was fine, pushing through the snow and making progress. Then I heard something behind me. Not footsteps, but something heavier, something moving through the trees. I thought how strong it should be if it can do that with ease, considering the effort I had to exert to move. I gripped the rifle, forced myself to keep going. The feeling got worse. It was like feeling you're being hunted, like something is just out of sight, keeping pace with you. That's what it felt like. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Then I saw footprints, not mine, but they were fresh. Worst of all, they did not look human, and they were leading ahead of me, like something already knew where I was going, and it was waiting for me, leading me even. I turned around, and I wasn't alone. It stood just inside the trees, tall, its limbs thin and jagged, its ribs pushing against paper-thin skin. Its eyes looked like empty soulless pits, and they were locked onto me. And in its arms, a body, a person, still alive, struggling to get free. And then, before I could even shout, it turned and vanished into the woods, taking them with it. I don't remember running. I don't remember much at all, except the sheer terror that pushed me forward, faster than I've ever moved in my life. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I saw the first lights of the town through the snow. They found me on the outskirts, half frozen, rambling like a madman about a demon. The search teams went out. They never found the person I saw or any sign of them. I left Wyoming the next day and haven't been back since. I still see it sometimes, not in the woods, not in my dreams, but in the corners of my mind. I pray for the poor soul he had got a hold of, and I pray that this monster gets banished for good. Do you remember hearing a story you wish you hadn't? Not some cheap campfire tale meant to spook kids before bed. I mean a story that sticks with you, that curls up in the back of your mind and waits, silent and patient, until one day you realize it wasn't just a story. I heard one like that. I wish to God I had never listened, and I pray to never set my gaze upon it again. I grew up in Boston, but my family had roots in Wisconsin. My uncle owned a small hunting cabin deep in the woods, the kind of place that had no electricity, no running water, just a wood stove and a bunk to sleep on. He used it for deer season, but in the dead of winter it sat empty. I was there for solitude. See, I'm a priest, and sometimes when the weight of the world gets too heavy, a man needs silence to pray. My father, God rest his soul, always told me the woods held things older than man. He used to say, never listen too closely to the wind, George. You might hear something calling back. I thought he meant wolves. He didn't. It started with a story. The old guys at the gas station in town were laughing when I told them I'd be staying in the woods alone. One of them, a man named Carl, shook his head and said, "You city folks don't know what's out there." I figured he meant bears. Then he said, "You ever hear about the Wendigo?" That shut everyone up. They told me it was an old story, something the native tribes spoke of long before settlers came. A thing that walks like a man but ain't a man no more. Something born of hunger, a flesh-eating sin, and it never stops hunting. I laughed it off. That was my second mistake. The first night was quiet. I sat by the wood stove, read my Bible, let the wind howl against the cabin walls. But by the second day I started feeling watched. At first I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the snow, the way the branches twisted in the wind, but then I found the tracks. Not deer tracks and not boot prints, something thin, too long, like a human foot but stretched. I told myself it was nothing, maybe some type of snowshoes. Maybe this was an odd trick of melting ice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then came the first encounter. It was dusk. I was walking back from the tree line when I saw it, a figure that was sitting behind a tree and seemed to watch me. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but then it blinked. I froze. My breath turned to mist in the air, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The thing was too still. As I focused my gaze, I could see more details. It sat with long thin arms wrapped around the tree. Its body was twisted in a way that looked wrong, and the eyes were just black pits, empty and waiting. And then it grinned, some failed attempt to mimic a human smile. It looked like he learned this. I turned and walked back to the cabin as fast as I could without running. I locked the door and I stoked the fire. I prayed and prayed. Outside in the dark, something laughed. Not loud, but only a whisper, like wind through dead leaves. I didn't sleep. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I was getting out of here. But when I stepped outside, the footprints were closer. It had circled the cabin, watching and waiting. I grabbed my uncle's old shotgun and the hunting knife. I am a man of peace, not a man of violence, but I wasn't about to be a man of stupidity either. I started walking. The nearest town was 10 miles away. I figured if I stuck to the old logging road, I'd made it by nightfall, but regretfully, I turned out to be wrong. I had been walking for around 2 hours when I realized the woods were silent. No birds and even no wind, only the crunch of snow under my feet and my heavy breath. And then the trees moved. Something huge shifted in the shadows, and then it charged. I don't remember raising the shotgun, I barely remember pulling the trigger. The blast echoed through the trees, and for some briefest moment, I saw it. This thing was too tall and unnervingly too thin, bones pressing against pale, stretched skin. Its hands were clawed, its mouth was too wide and full of jagged, broken teeth, with those black eyes, and still smiling. The blast did nothing. It didn't even slow down. I ran. God forgive me, I ran like hell. I don't know how long I ran, only that the sky turned grey, then dark, and still I could hear footsteps behind me. Never running, just walking, slow, patient, like it knew I'd die eventually, like it knew I was already dead. Then, in the distance, thank God, I saw a road. I ran towards it, lungs burning, legs screaming in pain. I hit the pavement and kept running, not stopping until I saw headlights cutting through the dark. A truck, a godsend. I barely had time to wave before the driver slammed on the brakes. He was a farmer whose name was Earl. He took one look at me, pale and shaking, and said, "You saw it, didn't you?" I was stunned, and I didn't answer, but I didn't have to. A week later, a group of hunters went out to my uncle's cabin. They found the door ripped off its hinges, the tracks in the snow, long, human-like footprints that shouldn't exist, led deep into the trees. And they never stopped. I don't tell this story much, but I share it with the people who ask for guidance in difficult times. I want to show them that in the face of true evil, you should never give up. However, every winter, when the snow falls heavy and the wind whistles through the trees, I remember the sound of that laughter. I clutch my cross and I pray to never hear it again. There are things in the woods we weren't meant to see. That's not just superstition, it's not just some old wives' tale. I know because I saw one, and it saw me too. I was in Michigan that autumn. There's a little cabin up near Marquette, sitting on the edge of some old logging trails. I needed time away, a chance to clear my head, to be alone. Being a priest doesn't mean you don't feel the weight of things, and I was carrying a lot. I've always found peace in hiking, walking deep into the wilderness, where the world is silent except for the wind and the trees. That kind of silence, the kind that stretches forever, makes a man feel closer to God. But there are other things in the silence too. The locals in town had warned me, if you hear something calling your name, you keep walking. If you see something in the trees that don't look right, you don't stop to look closer. I thought it was just campfire talk, or maybe even alcohol-induced visions. But an old man, a hunter by the looks of him, leaned in and said, "The Wendigo's been seen out there before." That name made the whole room go quiet. Wendigo? I had heard stories, tales of a thing that walks like a man but isn't one anymore, something that hungers endlessly. Flesh stretched thin over bones, eyes like black holes. They said it comes in the wind, its voice like the cries of the people it's eaten before. I told myself it was just folklore, and me as a priest will be well warded from demonic powers. That was my first mistake. The first time I felt its presence, its gaze, was out on the trail. The wind was howling through the trees, shaking leaves loose, sending them spinning across the dirt path like dying birds. I had been walking for an hour or two, letting the cold autumn air bite my skin. Then I saw the tracks. They did not look like deer tracks to me, nor boot prints. Something about them was wrong. They seemed too big to be human and also too thin. The toes looked twisted, like they had been broken and healed wrong. I crouched down to get a closer look, and that's when I heard something like a whisper in the wind. They were not words, or at least not exactly, but something shaped like words. Something that curled at the edge of my hearing just soft enough to make me doubt myself. I looked up. The trees stood still, but between the branches I could see it, something pale, shifting just out of sight. Something stalked me. I crossed my body and said a short prayer. I didn't run. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Maybe some part of me thought it was just my imagination. Or maybe I knew I should not show fear. So I kept walking, but it kept following. Not close, never close. Just far enough to let me know it was there, a shape in the trees keeping pace with me, moving without sound. I made it back to the cabin, my resolve hardened by the prayers. That night in the cabin, I locked the doors and stoked the fire high. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't, because outside, beneath the wind, I could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. I gripped the hunting rifle I had brought with me, my fingers tight on the stock. It was my uncle's, an old Winchester. I wasn't a great shot, but if the prayers did not help, this was my last line of defense. Then there was a knock on the window, soft, barely a tap. I turned, heart hammering, expecting what? A raccoon? A branch? No, something was standing just outside the glass. I couldn't see it clearly, only a shape, too tall and too thin, and two black eyes staring in. It twitched, and I instinctively fired. The glass shattered, the blast lighting up the night for half a second. And in that second, I saw it. God help me, I saw it. It was grinning with a mouth too wide, its teeth were like jagged shards of bone, and its skin was stretched tight over its ribs like it hadn't eaten in years. The worst part was that it laughed. Not a human laugh, not even an animal's, I would imagine this is how a demon's laugh is. And then it was gone. I didn't sleep, I prayed and clutched my cross. By dawn, I knew I had to leave as quickly as possible. But when I stepped outside, the footprints were everywhere, deep, sunken, circling the cabin again and again, and leading back into the woods. I started walking towards my car, and the thing followed. It wasn't gone. It wasn't hiding anymore. It wasn't stalking. It was toying with me. Every time I looked away, it got close. I'd catch a glimpse of a hand curling around the tree trunk, a flash of pale skin between the branches. The wind carried its whisper, not words, but almost. I ran. I hit the dirt trail and ran faster than I ever have in my life. The car was just ahead, maybe 30 feet away. Then it appeared in the middle of the road. It was standing between me and the car, tall, bone-tinned, and grinning. I didn't think. I said a short prayer while raising the rifle, and I fired. The shot tore through its chest, but it didn't flinch. Then it took a step forward, and another. I grabbed the hunting knife from my belt, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I thought I was going to die. Then a horn blared and headlights shined. It was like a godsend with church bells and light, but it was a truck coming up the road. The moment the light hit it, the thing shrieked, a sound so awful, so hollow, that it felt like ice in my bones. Then it was gone, vanished between the trees, leaving nothing but silence. The driver, some local, threw open his door. "Jesus, son, you okay?" "Bless you," I said, and I thanked him for stopping. A few weeks later, I heard the old man from the gas station had gone missing. They found his truck abandoned by the woods. No body, just footprints in the dirt leading into the trees. It seemed this demon became bolder or was angry. He was interrupted while trying to take me. I don't tell this story much, but every autumn, when the wind howls through the trees, I remember that laugh, and I pray it never calls my name again.